minutes. Welcome everyone to this really important discussion around inclusion and diversity in governance. I'm really glad that you're here, and we were talking just before we went live about the fact that inclusion on boards is a much asked about topic when Vic Sport and Sport and Recreation Victoria engage with the community, the sporting community, each year. So first of all, I would like to acknowledge that the country that we're all on today, the country that we live, learn, play and meet on. And for Vic Sport, we acknowledge the traditional custodians and owners of all lands on which we do business, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and future. We acknowledge the important contribution that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples make in creating a strong and vibrant Australian society, and of course in the sporting sector. If you'd like to, please pop a hi into the chat and the country that you're on today. I think that's a really nice way of us paying attention to that important part of Australian culture. I'd also like to say thanks to Sport and Rec Victoria, who have underpinned and underwritten this series, this governance series for Vic Sport. So there's been 4 governance workshops. I know many of you have been to all of them, and this is the final in that series. We are recording the session today. If you have any issues with being recorded or being on the recording, please let Vic Sport know. So inclusion and diversity, we talk a lot about inclusion and diversity. Well, certainly I do, because that's my job, but there's a lot said about inclusion and diversity in society, and thankfully more often in sport these days. And it's really important that we recognise that we include people from a range of different identities. And folks who are usually underrepresented in sport and in governance. Folks from the rainbow community, so the LGBTIQ plus community, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, people with a disability, folks with a multicultural background or heritage, and of course, women. Victoria, well, I get to travel around a lot across Australia and the world, and certainly in the Australian sporting landscape, Victoria has been seen as leading the way around levelling the playing field, particularly for women on boards. The program, the Change Our Game program, which spun out of a report done way back in 2015-16, has seen board parity, gender parity achieved on boards in Victoria. But there's more to do. And we know that with targeted focus, with awareness, with education, and coming together like this as a community of leaders, that we can reach other diversity, equity and inclusion targets, so that our boards, our sporting boards, are reflective of the communities that we play in and that we serve. To help me have this important discussion today, I'm joined by some amazing people. And these people have an awful lot of experience and a great deal of diversity. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves now, because they're going to be much better at that than I am reading out their bios. So without further ado, I'm going to throw to Azmeena Hussain, OAM. Azmeena, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And thank you so much for having me today. I too want to echo that acknowledgement of country. I'm coming to you from Naarm on Wurundjeri country, and I echo that acknowledgement of country, and also acknowledge that this was and always will be Aboriginal land. Where should I begin? As was mentioned, my name is Azmeena Hussain, and I serve currently on the board of the Victorian Institute of Sport, and I've just recently completed a term with Football Victoria. I also had the wonderful privilege of being an ambassador at the recent Women's FIFA World Cup, which was an incredible experience, and no doubt, I mean, we're all seeing the ripple effects from that, both from grassroots sport all the way through to leadership and governance, as we're discussing today. But in my experience from a very young age, I have had personal experience to the transformative power of sport. I grew up in the southeast suburbs of Melbourne. I was born in the southeast suburbs, and all through my childhood, really, I really had this strong sense of being different. I attended a predominantly Anglo-Saxon school, and I stood out to a large degree, and I probably at one point thought that something was wrong with me. But at the same time, and luckily, I was quite a good runner, and I represented my school and got a couple of primary and high school gold medals in running. And I found that when I was in sport, I wasn't any different. I totally forgot the identifying labels that I grew up with, and I wasn't different. I was just part of a team. And I really relished in that, and that sense of camaraderie and support that you get from your colleagues and your students at school and others in the sport. And so my love and interest in sport really developed into a passion for social impact, and that's where I find myself now. So my boring day job where I am today is working as a lawyer in a law firm, as a social justice lawyer, but separate to that, I really enjoy this work around sport and the powerful vehicle that it is. There's so many examples across the world that show to us that sport is such a powerful vehicle, and I mean, I don't need to tell any of you on the line about that. We know that sport is such a powerful vehicle in uniting people, in breaking down barriers and building community. And as such, my journey in governance and diversity is really driven by this passion for creating equitable opportunities and fostering environments of inclusion within the sports sector. In my experience, that starts from the leadership level and then from strong support in leadership, it infiltrates all the way through an organisation. As Michelle mentioned, I mean, there's still some way to go, and there still remains stark disparities and challenges faced by many, and those from diverse and underrepresented backgrounds. I mean, we still have a long way to go in creating talent pathways and ensuring representation at leadership level, to basically ensure that our organisations reflect the community we want to serve. So if you put it simply, think about who our stakeholders are, who our community is, who it is we want to represent and engage with, and does our organisation reflect that? If it doesn't, I think there's a bit of work that needs to be done, and yeah, I look forward to unpacking it in this conversation today.
Thank you, Azmeena, very much. And now I'd like to welcome Dr. Renae Domaschenz to the microphone. Over to you.
Thanks, Michelle, and welcome. And I'm coming to you from Ngunnawal country here in Canberra this morning. My name's Dr. Renae Domaschenz, and I have a passion to enhance lives and communities through the power of sport. And one of my biggest values is belongingness. So I'm the co-chair of Disability Sports Australia, where my role is to ensure effective leadership and management and governance of the business. Also the chair of the Governance and Policy Subcommittee for Disability Sports Australia, where we try and maintain organisational excellence in the governance and policy and constitution space. As part of my role for DSA, I'm also a director with the Australian Sporting Alliance for people with a disability, where we collaborate and advocate and facilitate inclusive sport and physical activity for people with a disability or an impairment or in fact a limitation. As an athlete, so I'm in the sport of rowing in my previous life, and recently been appointed to the World Anti-Doping Agency to the athlete seat with their compliance review committee, an excellent committee, a great group of people to be working with internationally, where we monitor the compliance of anti-doping organisations with the anti-doping code and issue international standards. So I'm sure you could imagine some of my conversations and the goings on in the world. In my spare time, I have a full-time job as in a professional advisory and consultancy firm, where we use multidisciplinary approaches to tailor advice and frameworks and plans, if you like, for particular governance challenges for the Commonwealth and federal government. Before I joined this space in my previous life, I was actually an associate professor in clinical science, attempting to win the Nobel Prize for curing cancer, and I haven't quite achieved that, but certainly made some inroads in that. As you can imagine, quite a male-dominated career space in science, also in sport. And I put at the bottom of my list because it doesn't define me, also a Tokyo Paralympian in the sport of rowing and a world champion coach to the parasport community for rowing. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Renae. Wonderful to have you here. And now my pleasure to welcome Rayoni Nelson. Over to you, Rayoni.
Thanks, Michelle, and gee, 2 hard acts to follow. Thanks, Azmeena and Renae. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Rayoni Nelson. I head up the Program Strategy and Research team at the Office for Women in Sport and Recreation. So for those of you that may not have come across the office, our key priorities around, like Michelle said earlier in her introduction, really levelling the playing field for women and girls in sport and recreation here in Victoria, and focusing on sort of 3 key priorities around participation, increasing representation of women and girls in community sport, increasing women in leadership roles across the sector, which very much fits with the theme of today's forum, and also reducing the visibility gap of women in sport. So I guess, opportunity to talk about the work of the office today, particularly around the Balance the Board policy and how that's had significant impact and opportunities for women to be represented on Victorian state sport and active recreation bodies. Outside of my job, I'm also experienced board director and have been on a number of boards over the last sort of 5 to 6 years, including at the national and state level. So currently sit on the board of Badminton Australia, a national sporting organisation for badminton here in Australia, Victorian Health Promotion Foundation, and also Vic Sport. So really excited to share some of first reflections on being a director. I've also supported board reform as a CEO formerly at School Sport Victoria, and how we sort of shaped the new governance model for that organisation as well. So it's an interesting conversation to come around governance from different perspectives. Formerly also played a bit of badminton in my time and went to the Sydney Olympics. So really excited to be giving back to the sport that was very benefiting of me, and being on the board of Badminton Australia is how I'm doing that at the moment. So looking forward to the conversation today. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Rayoni. And Julia Rovery, over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everyone, for having me, and how lovely it is to be surrounded by such amazing women. My name is Julia Rovery, and I have been working with migrants and asylum seekers for my whole career in several countries, in Brazil, in Colombia, in Germany, and now in Australia. I'm very passionate about social justice and inclusion. Currently, I'm the program manager for youth participation at the Center for Multicultural Youth. And the center supports young people from migrant and refugee backgrounds. In my portfolio are all programs that create a platform for young people to have their voices heard, and that creates opportunities for them to have a meaningful way to participate in community. One of these programs is the Sit at the Table, which I'll be talking more about today, and that aims to address the underrepresentation of multicultural young women in boards. I guess an interesting thing to mention as well is that I'm quite in a unique position because last year I joined the Sit at the Table as a participant, actually, and this year I'm leading the program. So it kind of gives me an outsider perspective, which I think that could be quite helpful. Very excited about the discussions and to listen to what everyone has to say today. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. And for those of you who don't know me, my name's Michelle Redfern. I tend to pop up anywhere where sport is being talked about, and particularly diversity, equity and inclusion in sport. My business is advancing women in business and sport, and my mission is to close the global leadership gender gap. And, the way that I do that is through lots of advocacy work, speaking like this, and working with amazing people like our panellists today to really look at the system. What is the system that is putting barriers in the way of underrepresented and marginalised people from achieving their full potential? Because we know that when people reach their full potential, so does their organisation, and the organisations, whether they're paid in the paid workforce or the volunteering workforce, because of course Australian sport it runs off the back of volunteers. So when those people reach their full potential, so does their organisation, so do their families, and of course so does society. So I am I know passionate's an overused word, but I'm extraordinarily passionate about this topic and feel very, very privileged to be asked to moderate and learn from this panel of very, very credible women. Speaking of credible women, you should follow all of them on all of the socials, because they've got a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom, as have all of you. And I think our collective wisdom as a community is really important. That's why I love the work that Vic Sport and the Office of Sport and Rec do, because when we come together, we are stronger together. So that's sharing, that learning. On that note, feel free to post your questions and your comments in the chat. The great folks at Vic Sport will be having a look at that chat and trying to get a word in edgeways with me and the other panellists. So do post your questions. We will have a Q&A at the end, but do, if there's stuff that's coming up and you've got a topical question, post it there. What is coming up? Well, 6 things. Number 1, we're going to talk about the benefits of board diversity. I know we shouldn't need to talk about it anymore, but I think it's worth revisiting because, we know that perhaps not all of the nuanced benefits of board diversity have really been explored. We will talk about the actions, and I am all about conversation to action. So we're going to talk about the actions that support inclusion on the board, including the role of the chair or the president and leadership. It all starts with leadership. We're going to talk about the recruitment, the election and the appointment of directors, the processes, the stuff that we can look at, the tools, the tips, the techniques, the organisations that can help. Then the barriers. How do we remove those barriers? Because remember, we're talking about a system here. What are the systemic barriers? How do we remove them? What are the practical things that we can do? Number 5, continuing these kind of discussions, improving awareness and understanding of why this topic, inclusion and diversity in governance, is so important and what we do about that. And then we'll open up for your questions. So that's what we're covering. You can hold me accountable. Going to try and stick to time, but there's a lot to cover there. So let's get going. So kicking off, thinking about the benefits of board diversity. Now, I do love a good set of statistics, and one of the statistics that I know acutely well is around the representation of women on boards. Currently in Australia, only 13% of sports board chairs are women, and 14% of sports CEOs are women. And that highlights that we've got a representation problem. Now, what I want to say straight up is that women aren't a homogenous group. They don't look like me. They don't all look like me. Middle-aged, white, privileged and educated. Women come from all walks of life. And what we want to talk about here around the diversity, the benefits of board diversity, is absolutely there's a fairness, fair go. Everyone deserves the right to reach their full potential and to participate in leadership at every level in every organisation. However, we know that board diversity in general, but particularly in this case, diversity in governance, creates better outcomes. No secret to any of you administrators on the line here today that sports is complex. It's complicated. I would say, VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguity. They are the hallmarks of our sporting environments. Yes, there's a lot of fun and a lot of fulfillment, but it's a complex environment, including the commercial environment. And these things are increasingly important, and to have a broad range of lived experience and skills to support that complexity on the board is incredibly important. So we've seen here in Victoria the Change Our Game program implement policy to create structural change in board. It has been wildly successful. And when gender quotas were introduced in 2017, we had a phasing period over 2 years, and then around 92% of boards within 2 years were compliant. Therefore, they were able to access state government funding. Lots and lots of positive outcomes. Better board dynamics and decision-making, strengthened governance, strategic planning, leadership and sport knowledge, and of course, the positive impact that a diverse range of people will have on the board culture and the dynamics, diversity planning and general processes. I'm going to throw to you straight away, Azmeena, how, from your experience, observation and your experience clearly as a serving board member, how has that change impacted the performance of the sports boards that you have served on and currently serve on?
Firstly, those statistics you say are very interesting. The 90+% compliance. For those that ever had some reluctance or hesitation, we'll have a look. The world hasn't fallen apart. If anything, it's proven so many benefits. The first thought that comes to my mind is when it comes to aspects of diversity, you mentioned all of them, Michelle, from Indigenous representation to all abilities to people from culturally diverse backgrounds and all the other categories. Often is the case is gender is the first and maybe the low-hanging fruit to address. And those statistics you've mentioned are excellent, but they show to us we still have a long way to go. We also need to take steps to get to maybe the more complex or harder aspects of intersectionality and have representation from all other facets of diversity. The Change Our Game initiative, in my experience, has been incredible in that it has shifted the dial in so many ways, from changing culture around representation around the board table and ensuring just greater representation of the people we want to serve. When we look at this from a governance perspective, it doesn't matter whether you're a sporting organisation or, like a private law firm like I work at, having the right people around the boardroom table is basically governance 101. What we need to do is look at who it is we want to serve and represent, and then ask ourselves, are they represented around the board table? And most importantly, this conversation around diversity and governance shouldn't be a conversation left to those people that look like me or Julia or Renae or whoever. It's a broader conversation, and my white male colleagues, my Johns and the Stephens of the world, they're just as much to be involved in this conversation as I am. In my experience, being a culturally diverse woman, I'm brown, I wear some cloth on my head, which means I don't need to do my hair, thank God. But it's so easy to just wrap this around. But I still find that it's still pretty new, and I'm still nice to have around the boardroom table. And I'm often part of the conversations to do with diversity, but I accept that, and I accept that because we've still got a lot of cultural change that needs to happen, and we've still got some way to go in normalising the image of women and normalising the image of people from culturally diverse backgrounds and other aspects of intersectionality to be represented at the boardroom table. Now, I'd rather have that seat than not, because it means that I can influence and play an active role in taking the blinkers off my co-directors and organisations I work with, and putting it simply, just make an organisation more progressive and reflective of modern Australia. But without the Change Our Game initiative, I don't think we would have got to the stage we have, and it's an important one, and I think there's still a lot more work to be done, and all of us have an important role to play in that. And I mean, everyone on the line today, just you being here affirms your commitment to creating change, and I personally put my hand up to support you and your organisations in any way to advance your mission, to be just basically reflective of Australia and a progressive sporting organisation.
Azmeena, I want to go a bit deeper on something you said straight up. Thank you for that. So the cultural improvement, and I'm not referring to multiculturalism here, but I think when we think about the benefits, sure, there's a right thing to do, fair go, etc. But when it comes, and I am very much about outcomes here, what are those outcomes that you see? Now, obviously, you can't talk about a board before and after that you've joined because you weren't able to observe the board before, but you've seen others who have come from underrepresented or marginalised backgrounds join leadership groups. Can you give the people on the call an example of how that dynamic or those cultural outcomes shift to a more positive one with that inclusion?
Yeah, absolutely. I think having those broader perspectives around the boardroom table contribute in so many ways. So, starting with the basics of governance, I mean, having a diverse and reflective board means that you've got broader skill sets. So different perspectives and experiences around the table lead to more innovation and well-rounded decisions that reflect the broader community. It assists with, strengthening governance. So governance practices, in my experience, improve remarkably in that, you're no longer stuck in that outdated model of groupthink. As a board, you're thinking more progressively and have greater strategic planning where you can foresee challenges and opportunities more effectively and lead to more robust and inclusive strategies. From a leadership and sports knowledge perspective, having a diverse board means varied backgrounds of board members, which can just holistically enrich collective knowledge and leadership capabilities. As I mentioned, it addresses board culture and ensures, you've got more of an inclusive and positive boardroom culture. And of course, from that leadership level, looking downwards into the operations and the organisation and those on the front line, it assists more broadly with structural changes. So promoting diversity lead to more diverse planning in terms of diversity planning and processes, better recruitment practices, better training programs, opens the pathways for talent, and just enhances more broadly policies that support inclusive workplaces.
Awesome. Thanks, Azmeena. Rayoni, I know you wear two hats, or you probably wear more than two hats, but when it comes to the outcomes, the positive outcomes we see from board diversity, you have both a research hat as well as a lived experience hat. So what are those outcomes that you observed wearing both those hats?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And I guess putting the research hat on, so we've talked a little bit around the Balance the Board policy that was introduced in Victoria, or all state sport and active recreations need to have a minimum 40% women on their boards to receive community sport funding. And we've partnered with Deakin University to undertake research to determine the impact of that policy on the governance of sport and recreation organisations across the sector. So we're not just talking about one organisation, but thinking about what the impact of that policy has been on organisations across the sector. And that research project was funded through one of our Change Our Game research grants. So I guess when we think about outcomes of that, what has been the impact of that policy, Michelle, you referred to the 90%. We know that since the policy has been introduced, consistently more than 90% of organisations are meeting that policy from 45% of organisations prior to the policy being implemented. So one outcome is, yes, more women are represented on sporting boards across our state organisations. But that's not the only impact. I guess findings from this research also looked at, well, what's the impact on the board performance, the board functions? How does diversity from a gender lens sort of impact the boards themselves? And pleasingly, it's had a really positive impact, particularly around board performance. And as many you mentioned it, around the board culture, the dynamics around the board table to inform effective decision-making in part of the research was surveying over 100 CEOs, board directors, chairs from organisations, and what they've seen as a result of the policy change and the result of more women on their boards. And that's what they've sort of said, that board culture, the cohesion amongst the directors has certainly improved. And secondly, actually, the board functions. You know, when you think about the role of the board, it's about risk management, it's about financial management, strategic planning. So the women that have been, engaged and by some sporting organisations, really sort of looking at more women on their boards, new skills and experiences also come onto their boards. Particularly women brought risk management, strategic planning and policy making skills and expertise, as well as expertise with the CEO. So again, across the sector, we're seeing this better board performance as a result of more gender balance on their boards. So it is about, I guess, some of the findings reflected. Well, women are bringing more maybe methodical, considered, formalised approaches to decision making. It might be around considered potential opportunities or outcomes to inform decisions, bringing a bit more detail around strategic planning processes, elevating diversity as a priority for the board and the organisation as well, and taking a more empathetical approach to communication. So that the research, I guess, is demonstrating yet again, the importance of having, again, from a gender lens, diversity around the board table, new skills, new different ways of approaching decision making. But it's important that the culture of that board then supports and elevates that. So particularly if you've got a board culture that is supportive of different perspectives, different views, different people's backgrounds, that is really healthy to engage that diversity of thinking, that diversity of views, and obviously helps the board then be really critical around their decision-making process. So it's one thing to have representation, but you need to have that environment that really supports individual board directors to respectfully challenge each other, but also to get the best outcome in terms of what they're working towards. Michelle, you mentioned I've got a couple of hats, as a current board director. That environment's really important to me, because I think it's important to have a voice around the board table, and having that respectful culture amongst your directors is really critical. It's important that we do hear views from different directors, because it's not just, one voice around the board table that needs to be dominant. So for me, I think as a board director, contributing, but also facilitating that board culture really, I guess, heightens the opportunity and the performance of the board overall. So yeah, that sort of skills that women bring, the opportunity for that sort of performance to be enhanced, but also creating that board environment where those benefits can really be realised is so key.
I couldn't agree more with both of you, and we're going to talk about that. It's one thing to be on a board as a, I guess, a person who looks and sounds a little different to the incumbents, but it's another thing to be able to participate fully. And certainly in my own experience, I've been on a number of different boards and felt variously included and excluded for various reasons. However, I can call out, and I'm very happy to call out, when I was sitting on the board of Williamstown Football Club, a VFL club, so state level club. I'd been on the board with another woman. We were the first two women on the board for some time. And one of the directors said, I just want to stop and reflect that, Michelle, since you've been on the board, Michelle and my colleague, Meryl, we've thought differently, and you ask us questions, because I must admit I am the queen of annoying questions, hence I do this job. But he said, you actually make us stop and think, and board meetings are a little bit more dynamic now. They're a bit more exciting, and I'm actually having to think about what I say and what we're doing. And it was a good reflection that some different people on the board, whether it's women, whether it's people from a multicultural community, all of the range of intersectional identities, helps people gain perspective about different lived experience, but it also makes things a hell of a lot more interesting than perhaps they had been. And, my summary of that, my words, not my colleagues, was we'd become a bit rinse and repeat, but these different people on the board have helped us think about our board governance, our cadence a lot more differently. Now, this is a good segue into the next part, which, Rayoni, you've talked about the inclusion of people on the board. All very well to be there, but if you sit there mute, not feeling like you can make a contribution, or there's fear or intimidation, or just a lack of overt inclusion, that can be a challenge. I want to refer back to some statistics. The 2022 Diversity in Sport Governance report by Sport Australia revealed that the development and achievement of diversity goals within board composition remains an area of focus. So we're now talking at a federal level. And of course, the federal government have now implemented gender targets linked to funding. There has been progress, there's no doubt about that, and we do have to celebrate progress, although I've got to say I get very, very frustrated at the glacial rate of progress. And the Play by the Rules report in 2022 emphasised the need for more inclusive governance in sport that goes beyond, as you rightly called out, Azmeena, it goes beyond gender, because gender is the low-hanging fruit, and it includes racial diversity, disability, LGBTIQ plus inclusion. And the inclusion of people from all walks of life must extend to our sports board. Racism in Australia Sport, report by the Australian Human Rights Commission, also highlighted that there is ongoing systemic racism faced by Indigenous athletes and other people of colour, which translates into exclusion, and this is the system again, exclusion from leadership and decision-making positions, including at board. Now, the chair or the president is absolutely critical to inclusion. They are the person facilitating and moderating the board proper, the discussions, the gatherings, etc. Those chairs who are proactively supporting DEI, diversity plus equity plus inclusion, can create for people who are underrepresented and marginalised a greater sense of belonging and that safety that we need to speak up. And that's absolutely essential, as we've already heard, for those sustainable, high-performing boards. Without that leadership, I think the attempts to diversify our boards are going to create a revolving door. Yeah, I got on a board, but it was a bit tough, so I'm out again. So, Renae, I want to throw to you as the co-chair of Disability Sport Australia. What are the practical things? And I must admit, I did a little scan of everyone on the call. Hello to everyone I know, and I know there are chairs and presidents on this call and who will watch later. What do they need to do, Renae? What are the actions, the genuine actions that you've seen inclusive chairs and presidents take to create that environment where, as a person who may be underrepresented, I can speak up and make my contribution?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And it's a really good question. I think, what I've heard, seen, or practiced myself is to make sure that I maintain an inclusive behaviour. People are really influenced by what they see and the behaviours that they're around. So to stay neutral, be patient, because as I'm sure we all know, building a positive environment takes time, and you need to take that time to build that environment. I always think about all the interaction points among my directors, so not just the formal meetings, but who's included in committee meetings or email exchanges, phone calls, social gatherings prior to any board meeting or committee meeting, needs to be carefully considered to maintain that inclusive behaviour. And the same should apply for any offline conversations, I should say, so no one feels games are being played behind them, which I'm sure many people on the call have experienced in their time. I also like to kind of create a common ground. So at the start of any interaction or meeting or committee, formal or informal, is just to make sure everyone is up to speed and explain why this is necessary, because we know the information can be disparate, and create different assumptions about different issues and its solutions, and can blow out of proportion either to a small scale or to a large scale. In regards to disability, it's really important, the word accessibility. And we're not just talking about physical accessibility to people, to presentations, how they view things. People with, impairments are not just physical. People have visual impairments, colour blindness, those kind of things that affect when they're reading documents. So we really want to make sure that any documents that are published or any meeting that is had in the disability space, we also make sure that we have an Auslan interpreter, or we check to see who, are coming to those meetings or people that we're talking to, and making sure that they have accessibility on the same levels that anyone else does. Just making sure that the knowledge and environment, is safe and a good place for people to be able to contribute. As a co-chair, I interact regularly with directors as part of my role, and I also often use open questions to expose assumptions and generate additional options. Really makes people feel like they're being asked for their opinion and making sure that they can contribute instead of being lectured at, if that makes sense. People with a disability or impairment, not surprisingly, don't want to be added to a board just to tick the box for inclusion and diversity. And I would like to think most boards would also not be in the space to want to employ and appoint someone with a disability or an impairment to a board to check that box of inclusion and diversity. People with disability, impairments, limitations, they want to contribute to an organisation. They want to grow in their leadership style. They want to find their skills, and they want to be constructive, in that space. We also, in regards to not ticking those boxes only, we also want to make sure as a board that we're recruiting for particular skill sets that are required to govern, the business or the associations, as well as being inclusive to disability and impairment. So, if we're recruiting for directors and we have someone with a disability in impairment, that's not the first thing we look for. We do need to look for those skill matrix. We do need to run our business. But the statistics, Michelle, as I'm sure you would have seen, people with disability, limitations, impairments often don't have those skill sets to be put on boards in that space. So how do we work around that? Well, at Disability Sports Australia, we aim to create opportunities and capability uplift to support people with disability and impairment, to reach those required skill sets. So how do we do that? We've established a disability advisory group. And so these people with disabilities or impairments or limitations don't just come from sport, they come from all kinds of life and the community, because we don't just have disability sport, we have people with impairments in, just in the general community. So we've built this advisory group, and here we can expose them to be board observers. So we can expose them to committee decisions or what the strategy is being implemented by the board and the business, what kind of governance we look at, and we ask them for their advice from their lived experience or what they've seen in their community and their ideas. So we're kind of getting them involved in that governance and policy space quite early. And, this gives us an opportunity to help them build their skill sets, which then they might, build that skill set to then be employable or appointed in a subcommittee capacity, not just us for Disability Sports Australia, but for any organisation or any association in the community. And from those subcommittees, we know they build those skills then to have those skill sets, to hit that matrix to then make their first board position. So we feel like we'd be able to support people in that way, to capability uplift people with disabilities, to gain appointment in leadership and board roles in the future. And we've all been there. We've all been in a position where we've been pitching ourselves for our first committee or our first board meeting. And we often see, CVs that come through that don't have any skills in that matrix. And I think I'm probably one of the first people that don't turn that away straight away. Okay, well, what do they have? Or who do I know? Who can we network with to put them in a position of an advisory group? It's a great start for people that, don't quite have that skill set to build them up in that capacity.
Well, I absolutely love that, Renae, because this is looking at the system top down, bottom up, but saying, we know that the exclusion of people with a disability is going to come right from the outset. So how do we do those really, I guess, practical things, observerships, advisory boards, giving people exposure to skill building and capability building, and also the exposure that those people get, and vice versa, that incumbent directors get to people with a disability or accessibility challenges. It really is fixing the system. The other thing I want to pick up on for everyone on the call is creating that common ground and making sure that there's not an in and an out crowd. As a chair, the equity. And so if I'm calling so-and-so every week after the board, the meeting that happens after the meeting, I should be calling everyone, the water cooler conversations, or the who do I have my conversations with. Make sure that as a chair, you're equitable and you're including everyone, not just the people you feel most comfortable with, because they probably look like you and sound like you and hang out in the same places as you. I think that's a really deliberate action, and that common ground, explaining that up front to a board. And certainly as my first board, had no clue what was going on, having a chair to say, hey, Michelle, now what we're going to do on this agenda item is this, and this is why we need to talk about blah, blah, blah. It creates a shared understanding. And it's also good for incumbent people because they might go, oh, good, I never had the guts to ask what that was all about. Now I know. Thank you. So I think those are really good practical actions. I guess, Julia, let's expand on that because advisory boards and observerships, Renae mentioned, and your seat at the table work is, I'm very excited by it. Young people, people from multicultural backgrounds, folks who are typically not considered or actively excluded from boards. What have you seen as really effective enablers for your folks and, creating those inclusive governance processes for people from multicultural heritages?
Thank you, Michelle. So I think the first and more overarching issue is probably reviewing policies and practices to make sure that they are indeed inclusive and they remove barriers for people to participate. You have to be really intentional about diversity. So it's not just kind of something that happens. You have to be really mindful around the difference between, an equality and equity. And it's not about providing everyone the same opportunities, but making sure that people have what they need to succeed, however that may look like. Then definitely representation. So of course, the leadership needs to reflect the diversity within the community. We talked about this, so it's that old, you can't be what you can't see. Then having the governments and leadership being really committed, as we mentioned before, is extremely important, through providing training and promotion and offering mentorship opportunities. As also was mentioned before, creating a positive group culture is extremely important. So making sure that you have those reflective conversations in your meetings. As Renae pointed out, you're checking, understanding everyone is on the same page. Also making sure that it's a space that is cultural safe, that there is an attitude there that we can do better. So there's always something to learn, that people are open in that space. And also being flexible and willing to put that change forward. So a lot of the times, slight adaptation to processes and, like we're saying, modes that you deliver something and presentations can have a huge impact into how people are able to access those positions and opportunities. It's really important to keep checking, so asking people around you, like stakeholders, employers, clients, the members, where you're at and how you're doing and how you can improve. So keep having those conversations, not just internally but also externally, is really important. Identifying organizations and resources that can help you, because you don't have to be an expert in inclusion and diversity. You don't have to do all of this alone. There is plenty of people out there with the expertise to assist you and your board. So, for example, CMI, through Sit at the Table, match boards with multicultural young women and provide a training for that to happen. CM Sport as well has piloted an initiative that was supported by the Australian Sports Commission that provided workshops, is providing right now to different sporting associations, introducing tools and practices on how to engage multicultural young women in leadership positions. So it's just really understanding that it's a learning curve and being committed to that learning and creating that environment within your board as well.
I really like the statement, be intentional. And never a truer word has been spoken, and the way I say it far less eloquently is hope is not a strategy. And both Azmeena, Rayoni, or Azmeena, Rayoni and Renae, and now you, Julie, have all mentioned it. We just can't hope that things will change. We need to be intentional. So for the board chairs, aspiring chairs and presidents out there, you really need to be intentional about this. One of the ways to be intentional is to get to know your board members. What do my board colleagues need to be successful? Love that question, Julia. What do I need to be successful? Super duper important, because there are going to be different needs from a whole bunch of different people. And of course, we want people to be successful. Already pointed out, when they're successful, we're successful, so on and so forth. One of the practices that I learned as a board director, and then I now shamelessly stole and tell all of my clients about for any kind of meetings to be inclusive, is to appoint an observer for the meeting. Yes, they're part of it, but the observer will take note of the behaviours, the dynamic, etc., during the meeting, and then play that back as a reflection at the end of the meeting. And part of that, and particularly clearly I work on diversity, equity and inclusion, the inclusion piece is, were we operating to the charter or the values that we aspire to in this meeting? Did everyone have a chance to be included, to participate in a way that works for them, so on and so forth? So I think a really practical addition to the great advice is appoint an observer and someone who plays back a reflection at the end of each board meeting. Did we do what we set out to do? I think it's a good chance now to segue across to getting people on boards, and not just any people, not just the same homogenous group of people we've seen on boards since boards started being boards, but I guess looking at how do our boards start, how do we accelerate our boards to start looking like the communities that we serve? So again, some statistics. Principle 4 of the Sport Australia Governance Framework says that a board should be a diverse group of people who collectively provide different perspectives and experience to facilitate more considered decision-making. In the same report, Sport Australia says 33% of boards are still scoring very poorly in this area, and it remains a focus for Sport Australia in terms of lifting performance in this area. Recruitment is often talked about, and we have already touched on that with the Change Our Game or the Balance Boards program here in Victoria, and of course now federal government stepping into this space with the announcement just 2 months ago about gender balance on boards to access government funding. But again, to echo what Julie has just said, we need really intentional strategies and robust processes to attract candidates from diverse and underrepresented communities. And I say intentional with great emphasis because in my experience, people from underrepresented groups aren't just going to front up to your footy club, netball club, whatever your sporting clubs, go, oh, hello, here I am. I hear you want to be inclusive. I'd like to be a part of your board. They just won't. So we need to be very, very intentional about it. Azmeena, throwing back to you, what can we do to help improve the end-to-end life cycle processes around identifying, attracting, appointing and keeping candidates from those underrepresented communities on boards?
Yeah, no, great question, Michelle. I might start by just clarifying, I think there's often a misconception that people from diverse backgrounds or underrepresented backgrounds lack merit or capability. Let me tell you, there is so much talent out there. The problem is often to do with the appointments process. And if you look at it in a very simple form, have a think about who your friends are. I've got a group of friends, my circle of friends, I really like them because they're really similar to me. We have a similar sense of humour. We like the same foods and we basically talk the same. The same thing kind of happens in life. You go to recruit someone for a role. I see myself doing it. I recruit someone and I like them, and my first feedback is oh, they speak my language. They talk like me. And it's very natural and it's human to gravitate towards people that look and sound like us because we feel safe. The same thing happens in the boardroom. When it comes to diversity, we really need to strip it back and look at it from a risk perspective. If we continue to operate like that, it's going to be a significant risk to our future success. Now, to your question, Michelle, around how do we go about addressing it, I should say from the outset, the Principle 4 of the Sport Australia governance framework, it really does emphasise the importance of diversity on boards to enhance decision making. And that said, where we are taking steps, but there's a long way to go. And I still am the culturally diverse representative on the board. The Indigenous person is probably still the Indigenous representative on the board. And we do need to improve the recruitment and appointment processes to ensure that boards are diverse, and it's just business as usual. It's just what we do. So how we go about that, I think the first step is to Julia's point around intentional recruitment strategy. So we need to take a really targeted approach. Have intentional recruitment strategies that seek out candidates from diverse and underrepresented communities. Now you might say, well, how do you do that? I think you need to take targeted outreach approaches, and you can do that through partnerships with organisations or community organisations. For example, you can kill two birds with one stone by partnering with an organisation like CMY, for example. They do terrific work and have for years and years done terrific work engaging with multicultural communities. They have a terrific brand. They can not only help you find candidates for board appointments, but they can also assist with other aspects in terms of building the footprint of your sport, creating talent pathways for participation. I work at the Victorian Institute of Sport and sit on their board. I'm really fascinated to know about talent pathways. So are we creating opportunities for young people to fall into the path of becoming a VIS candidate? Is there opportunities to extend that scope? So, for example, if we were to partner with Centre for Multicultural Youth, we could achieve that. And at the same time, CMY can assist us with identifying talent. So there's many business incentives to take on a partnership with whichever special interest group or underrepresented group out there. Once you've addressed that, once those candidates are appointed, we do need to address that issue of being the diverse candidate around the boardroom table. It feeds into the issue that was mentioned earlier. You're in a board meeting. I'll put it frankly, there's no denying that for the first couple of meetings, I got to prove myself. I've got to prove my worth and why I'm there. And I see myself having to do that. Often, people defer to those with industry experience or knowledge of the sport for the important conversations. But everything else, and discussing RAP and diversity and all of those things, people are turning their heads towards me, and that's where I contribute. I'm there to contribute in every aspect as a board director. I carry the legal responsibility, I carry the liability, and surprise, surprise, I have the merit and understanding and knowledge to contribute to conversations beyond diversity and inclusion. That is not a question of merit, that's a question of addressing bias. And I think there's an important role to play in bias training. That should certainly start from the board level, start from the president and the chair to the board, and then work through every aspect of C-suite to executive management to frontline staff. Bias training shouldn't be just something that some of the organisation do. And importantly, bias training should not come in as a nice to have. It's a risk to business if we don't represent the community we serve, and for example, our sponsors don't serve or represent the stakeholders that we want to engage with. Bias training is core business. From there, secondary to that, there's also aspects of having, transparent and inclusive processes in terms of recruitment. So having and setting those specific diversity targets, ensuring that people who sit on panels for recruitment represent the diverse communities we stand with. And then lastly, you know, as an individual, you'll say, oh, well, I can't create this big change within my organisation. I'm only one person. But each one of us can play an important role. So, for example, operationally, if you set a target within your organisation to ensure representation of diversity in every speaking opportunity, in every you know, marketing strategy, or even just in leadership or decision-making roles. If you're sitting around a meeting table, if it's not reflective of diversity, have a conversation and say, hey, we should bring some women into this, or people from underrepresented groups to be part of this conversation. We all have an individual role to play, whether you're a frontline staff or you're a president on the board looking to appoint new directors. You've got to infiltrate it from every angle, top down, bottom up.
Well, you got me excited when you mentioned the M word, merit, because I do get very, I don't get excited, actually, I get extremely cross, because merit is, you know, what is merit? What constitutes meritorious? And it's a question that I often ask when I'm in groups. Say, well, we only appoint on merit, Michelle. I go, can I please have a list of the meritorious criterion, please? And they go, we haven't got that. And I said, so it isn't meritorious. It's completely and utterly subjective. Well, no, it's not. And I go, well, actually it is. So anyway, I won't go around with the circular arguments that I have, but you are bang on there, Azmeena. Targeted outreach, talent pathways. There's some practical things there, folks, but you know what? We all have a role to play. And if we're waiting for the training or the session or the policy or the something or the Messiah to come along and solve this, we'll be waiting a long time. Each one of us can take action today to do one act of inclusion that might help diversify sport. Julia, Rayoni, what else have you seen that has reduced those barriers and created more diverse boards? Because I'm really, you know, I love everyone on this call today to go, there's the one thing I'm going to pop in my pocket and go and do right away. What have you seen?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And I'll draw again from the research that Deakin University undertook around sort of also understanding the process that sporting organisations went to achieve gender balance on their board. And appreciate I'm coming from a gender lens, but this can also be applied from a broader diversity and inclusion lens as well. And I guess in terms of one of the key things is that sporting organisations didn't just use one approach. They generally used multiple approaches, because it's not just one silver bullet. You need to sort of be tailored around who it is that you're wanting to attract and retain onto your board as well. But I'll give you 5 sort of key practical aspects that organisations felt were most effective, and appreciate that some of these may be not necessarily suitable for every organisation, but you get some kind of practical tips from these aspects. The first one was, and I think Azmeena mentioned it, structured recruitment. So being really clear around when you're recruiting or you've got a vacancy, you know, being really structured and targeted in that approach. And things that were most effective were actually having, have you got a director's board description? Do you are actually articulating what you're seeking from board directors, what their commitment is, even practical things like how many meetings, when are those meetings held? They're really important for, you know, not only women, but for people to go, actually, can I commit to this? Is this something that I can achieve? But also specifically where you are looking for particular skills or particular attributes from that vacancy, calling that out to be really targeted with seeking board directors with these skills, this background, etc. So I think that's number 1. Number 2, in no particular order, was around board flexibility. And this is around, and Renae, you sort of mentioned it a little bit around particularly accessibility as well, making sure that people looking to join your board, there's flexible options to do that. Now, we're all virtual now, but back in the day, you know, we were all around a board table at a particular point in time, potentially, you know, after work, when family meals are being prepared, when life is happening outside. So I guess providing flexible options for board directors to engage, and that's not just for women, it's for everyone. It benefits everyone around that board table. The third one is a little bit more involved, and that's around constitutional reform. So many boards have a mix of elected directors from their member organisations and appointed directors. So for some sporting organisations, the criteria to become an elected director was quite, you know, quite overwhelming. There was a lot of requirements. So some organisations actually sort of reflected on what are the requirements to become an elected director, and was that limiting the pool of women that could actually put their hands up for that nomination process. Another strategy that's been effective is organisations that have used their appointed directors to bring on particular skills or people with those particular skills that they're looking at. So effectively using appointed director positions, which are appointed by the board, is a really key strategy that's been quite effective as well. So that's 3. Number 4 was about board culture reform. So thinking about, you know, we've talked about it, I won't harp on it too much, but how that board dynamics works, what's the role of the chair in facilitating that. It's one thing to attract a woman onto a board or someone new to a board. It's actually keeping them there. And if they're not feeling that they're part of that conversation, they're contributing, that they're safe, then that person's not going to be staying for too long. So making sure that that board culture is really looked at as well. And last but not least, and this is probably something maybe for organisations that are thinking about women in their sport more broadly, but the key strategy was for some sports to think about, well, how are women represented across our sport? If we're trying to attract women onto our boardroom, you know, have we got good representation of women across our sport, full stop? And that's not only as leaders in the boardroom, but coaches, officials, like how are we supporting women more broadly across our sport? So for some sports, their strategy was actually we need to take a bigger look at this picture and think about how we can engage more women across our sport, which then ultimately supports a wider pool of women to join our board as well. So there's different practical aspects from the research, and we will be sending out a copy of the research summary that, depending on where you're at, some things are pretty easy to change, other things might take a bit more of a longer term approach. Michelle, just a quick example from myself. Hampton, Australia, about 8 months ago, we had a number of vacancies, and it was a really good opportunity for us as a board to, yes, we did the skills audit, but also in terms of where we're at in our strategic planning life cycle. And we had a mix of elected and appointed director vacancies. And it was a good opportunity for us to kind of reassess what sort of lens, what diversity, what background skills do we need around the boardroom to really advance the sport and in terms of its strategic planning in particular. So a couple of things we did, we refreshed the position description. We clearly outlined, as I said, you know, sort of commitments from board directors. We clearly called out particular skills and expertise that we were really seeking. And we also advertised it widely outside of the sport community, sort of basically trying to attract widely, as well as obviously encouraging nominations from within the badminton community. And we were overwhelmed with not only the quality of nominations, but just the quantity of people wanting to be on the board. And we were really fortunate to have appointed, those directors, 2 of which were women who brought those skills, those gaps that were needed to drive the sport moving forward. So I think some of those sort of more practical tips we've found, in my experience, have been really beneficial in that example.
Great examples, Rayoni, and I think, you know, it really dovetails beautifully into what Azmeena was saying around that targeted outreach and also demystifying the process. I think there's still some kind of auras around what it takes to be a board director, and certainly in a couple of communities, women on board communities I'm a part of, the coaching that we give is to say, if you think you're ready, you are. If you think you're not ready, you are. So have a go and start your journey, because it's a terrific way to contribute to the country, quite frankly. But we do have to demystify the process and really say, you have got the skills, and maybe it's no for the board right now or not right now, but gee, a committee would be great for you to start building some of that awareness and skills. I'm changing the agenda, panellists, just on the fly because I'm conscious of time, and I really want to call out the elephant in the room and get each one of you to comment on bias. And Azmeena, you called it out. Bias, whether it's conscious or unconscious, plays an enormous part in creating barriers to people participating in boards, and us getting our boards, sports boards, to be reflective of our fabulously multicultural community. We know that the status quo is very comfortable for a lot of people, and that change is deeply uncomfortable and will perpetuate behaviours to try and stop that change. I'll put it less kindly. We do have to dismantle the old white boys club. And I've got to say, there's a bit of an old white girls club as well when it comes to boards in Australia. That persists. We actually have to do that through providing all of these pathways, leadership, mentorship, so on and so forth. But I want to throw to each one of you and say, what do we do? What's the one thing you want to see done if for all of these people on the call today to dismantle bias and barriers? Azmeena, I'm going to go to you first.
Yeah. I've had a long journey with this. Sometimes you get frustrated. Sometimes you laugh at it. My brother's a comedian, so I give him lots of material. But what I've come to the conclusion is, and what I've found my recipe of success around addressing this is, I think bias is there, whether it's unconscious or not. That's a conversation on its own.
Yes.
But it's there, right? And we need to address it. I find in my experience is first having those quotas and having representation is important, because as we started this session, we spoke about the advancements we've made in having women represented on the board and on board tables. And surprise, surprise, the world hasn't come to an end. It makes good sense, and we've got evidence base that it does. Or as a lawyer, we've got the evidence. Moving forward, though, what I find works very well is aligning this notion of diversity to core business. If diversity is addressed through being aligned to, for example, your strategic plan, where the outcomes of diversity are very clear and representation is very clear, I think there's a strong business case to ensure that your organisation is reflective of the community we serve. There's often this notion that this conversation we're having today is a nice to have. And, you know, even in a post-COVID era, we saw that sporting codes had to cut the fat. Often this topic of diversity and inclusion was considered fat, and initiatives around it were cut out. If we can better align diversity and inclusion strategies to our core mission, and align it to the financials, and align it to risk, and align it to make good business sense, I think you can better explain why it's important, and it completely moves out of that category of being a nice to have into core business. And then it no longer becomes this notion of, oh, you know, we've got one, so we've ticked that box. At the same time, having, you know, bias training that we spoke about will help with that as well. But I think what fast tracks it is aligning all of these initiatives to the core business value. Not sure if Michelle's.
I am here. So I guess aligned to the core business, the business case is great. I would have thought we'd be beyond that by now, but clearly we're not. Renae, what do you think? I mean, again, throwing to you, the barriers, removing those barriers, what is it really going to take? And again, an actionable insight for the folks on the call today.
Yeah, look, I think the 3 strategies that I have for overcoming bias is probably becoming aware of bias. You know, when you become aware of bias, you know, becoming aware of it and how it affects your decision making is vital to combating it, right? Secondly is probably improving cultural competency within my board. So for my directors, my committee members, my staff members, my, you know, the members of the association, and, you know, if we're thinking a bit bigger, the sector. And probably the third one is to create safe spaces for learning and personal development. I think, you know, those are probably the 3 strategies for me to overcome bias.
Yeah, thanks, Renae. And again, very practical. I think we've talked previously about, you know, learning, being intentional about inclusion, or diversity, equity, and inclusion is also building your own capability and competencies. Julia, what about you? You've got the, you know, young people, multicultural people. There are enormous biases and barriers when it comes to your folks like you and your colleagues. What's your advice?
Right. So I echo a lot of the points. So I think self-reflection is key when it comes to biases. If we don't look at our own practices, we're not able to kind of move forward. With that, training is really important. So culturally responsive practice training, for example, to get people to kind of like, as much as obvious as it looks, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So then for some people it will be a kind of a transformative thing. And I think also using your platforms to be able to challenge these biases. So listening to stories from people that don't conform, you know, kind of like are not playing into that stereotype and that kind of place in the world that we put them in. The more that we kind of listen to those narratives and hear from people with lived experience, the more that we can challenge these. And I think when it comes to like using our platforms, for example, with the sit at the table, one of the big kind of problems there with linking with multicultural young women joining boards is that they just lack the social capital and the networks to even hear about these boards, to even think that this is a possibility, and then let alone to apply and actually take on an opportunity. So CMI played a very important role in doing just that, in tapping into the context that we did have, and then linking them in with those opportunities. As it was mentioned again and again, also the boards are very kind of like intimidating and mystical space. So for a lot of the women, including myself, felt quite out of grasp, I think, to be part of these spaces. So by kind of putting yourself into that situation, even as an observant, and having the workshops for the participants, which were an opportunity for us to really talk about our learnings, our experience, and how everything was going. Getting a bit of that peer support was very key. So we didn't, you know, kind of get to that first meeting, like was mentioned, and also kind of jump ship because it was too much. And having that board contact also that was matched with each of us to kind of help guide you through the process. So you are able to follow it through. Because when you get to a board, there is like one or another woman at the most, and you're like 15 years younger than anyone else. It's quite hard to feel like that's a safe space and a space that you have something to contribute. And that was one of the biggest kind of concerns for me. And one of the biggest learnings from the program was that once I sat down there and I was listening to it, I have a lot to say about everything that's happening. And I'm in a position that I can. And like we talked about merit. So I think that there is a great interest from multicultural young women to be part of boards. It's just that they lack the right support to actually engage. So it's keeping that in mind.
Well, Julia, I really have to pick up on the point about the social and political capital, and let's get all of the people we're talking about, not just throw them into some mentoring program, but put them into a strategic mentoring program that turns into sponsorship, that helps people navigate these mystical environments, as we've talked about, and to build their social and political capital, because that is super important and often not talked about enough. That's terrific advice. Rayoni, what about you? What would you like to see more of or less of when it comes to removing bias and barriers?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I was actually just reflecting on a session I did with the board. Actually, Julia prompted me with CM Sport, and we went through a board diversity workshop, which was really insightful. And I think where sort of an anecdote for me came around bias is sometimes just being aware of how bias plays out. For example, even just advertising or promoting board vacancies, where you're promoting that inherently might be creating bias. So it's just sort of, I guess, broadening. We can challenge our understanding around where bias is, whether it's intentional or unintentional, but also how we can address that. So it's probably just that awareness thing for me, but also being recognised that some of our practice might be creating unintentional bias, and how do we sort of call that out amongst ourselves as board, but also maybe having external people to guide that conversation, to create that awareness, to call things out on ourselves as well is important. So not sure if that's where you're heading, Michelle, but that's just one of mine where it came, a practical example there.
Yeah, no, it was fantastic. And you know, your collective wisdom, the four panellists, has been very, very useful to break that down. And clearly all of you bring different experiences, different tactics and strategies to address bias and barriers. I guess call out to the audience now, a reflective question for you. How confident are you that your board actively supports inclusion, diversity, equity and inclusion? I really, you know, want you to sit with that. And, you know, if you are on a board that champions all of this, all of the strategies that the panellists have talked about today, bring this up at your next board meeting. How confident are we that we are a diverse, well, you can look around and see if you're diverse, equitable and inclusive board? How do we know that? And as Rayoni rightly pointed out, sometimes it does take an external party to help you understand, are we being as inclusive as we could be? Or as Julia has said, have we examined our policies and our processes to see if they're unintentionally putting barriers in the way of increasing diversity? Or, as Azmeena and Renae have said, are we going to the person who is representative of our diversity each time to talk to us about diversity? And I'm reminded of a saying that the burden of inclusion shouldn't be placed on the excluded. So it's not up to excluded people to create the solutions. It's up for us, the people who sit at the table, who have power, influence and authority, to create those solutions. And often that means looking within first and saying, what could I do more of or less of to be a truly inclusive board director? So how confident are you folks about your board's current performance on inclusion? Take that away and have a conversation at your board. I will open up for questions. I did put a prompt in the chat. Any questions from our audience and from the folks at Vic Sport? Have we had any that I haven't paid attention to on the way through? I'll just pause.
No, Michelle. I think I think you've covered it all off so well, and the panellists have really been so informative and useful information they've provided. So no, it's been great. Nothing coming through yet, but perhaps if anyone did have a question, it's a bit hard to put it into the chat. Perhaps just unmute yourself and bring yourself into the session, and feel free to ask these well-credentialed panellists. No, nothing coming through, Michelle. Well, I think on
yet.
that, we just about sort of come to the end of the session here. Perhaps just a quick sort of reminder and follow up from me from the Vic Sports side of things. Firstly, thanks, Michelle, and all the panellists for your time. Really useful and informative chat. I've spent quite a bit of time around governance and issues relating to it, and I think this stands as perhaps one of the most useful in relation to inclusion and diversity. And we'll certainly be encouraging everyone to distribute this session, because we'll be recording it. We'll follow up with an email with a copy of the recording, and also a number of resources from the Office for Women's Sport and other bits and pieces that have come up through the session. We'll email that back around to everyone. And really take some time to read that, to share it within your networks, and let's try and broaden this out to those people that need to be making these decisions and putting the change in place that we all want to see. So thank you again, Michelle. I'll pass over to you, perhaps just for a final wrap up, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks,
sorry,
Anthony.
I think just before we go, there was a question for Azmeena from Kylie. Did you want to bring yourself into the chat, Kylie?
Thank you. Azmeena, lovely to meet you. I just wanted to flag a question with you in regards to diversity at the boardroom table. Do you actually, is it at the professional level that you work with, or also at the domestic level?
What do you mean by domestic, sorry?
So at the club level, so you're dealing with the professional level or at a club level. So before athletes get to professional.
Yeah, so using the VIS example, I sit on the board of the VIS, so it's
Yes.
within the professional context. But certainly my role at Football Victoria, when I was on the board there, again, professional, but certainly had exposure to club level as well. I often find at that level, you're so tight on resources that a lot of the time and energy goes to just the running of the club or getting the grassroots operations up and running. So it's a lot harder, but certainly there's lots of support there from both, Football Victoria do a terrific job around that, and we've done a lot of work in diversity and inclusion at the professional level, and of course, at the Victorian Institute of Sport as well.
Yeah, I guess where my question's coming from, I've worked at board level for from a basketball point of view, and working with boards in regards to diversity. It's much easier when you're working at the professional level, but I've also worked with some with boards from a domestic level and committees from a board level as well. It's a lot harder in terms of the education and bringing them along the journey. And it really resonated with me in terms of your comment on being able to get them to focus on who their audience is, from that perspective. But I do find it really challenging to get them to embrace that. Is there any recommendations that you can give in terms of, I know that the associations do support, but in terms of board members, as Michelle mentioned, we've got to educate, we've got to really get on board and and support diversity. But it is challenging when you're dealing with very, I suppose, set in their ways other board members that are not necessarily willing to move.
Yeah. I often find with the more conservative board members, it's about breaking it down and simplifying it to reflect how it affects the bottom line. So when I worked with Football Victoria, for example, there was incentive around having a diverse governance structure at club level, and there was incentive there. And explaining the bottom line and the impact it'll have really helped sell that message. And that's why I speak a lot about aligning to the strategic intent. So strip away all the warm and fuzzy, nice to have, it's good to be inclusive, it's great to have people like me appear on your brochures, park all of that stuff. Let's look at the bottom line and what does that mean for your sport. If we want more people to participate in basketball, who's the makeup of those that enjoy basketball?
Yeah.
Are they represented within the sport? Do we have participants that represent the makeup of our community? If they don't, well, we need to address that to get more participants in the sport. But then when we're sitting around the board table, do we as an organisation look and represent that makeup? Are there women? Are there people from culturally diverse backgrounds? Probably not. And honing into that bottom line and the impact it has on there, that Change Our Game initiative around having targets to get funding is a perfect example of that. People are receptive to that and respond to it really well.
Yeah,
so
great.
Position your mission around the bottom line, and it works very well for the Conservatives. And I'm mindful of time, but a very quick example. I work at a labour law firm. For 100 years, we have worked with unions, and we sell our business very well to unions because that's what we do. We stand up for ordinary people. But I came to this law firm and I said, hey, we don't really engage with multicultural communities. We say we want to provide access to justice for everyone, but we're not really engaging with multicultural communities. So what are we doing about it? What worked really well was when I showed to them the bottom line and how it impacts on, if we're not targeting this whole community, we're missing out on this work in this whole community. And I found the people that were much more conservative were much more receptive to that sort of language.
Yes.
And it's an unfortunate reality, but I found it works. And I say it doesn't matter about how you get there. The main thing is you're getting your outcome, and you will if you sort of take that approach. And then, of course, partnering with organisations like Julia's, CMY, they do some terrific work around this, and it's a multi-benefit outcome. But keep going at it, Kylie, and you're challenging the status quo, which is never easy. So keep knocking on that door.
Thanks for that. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. And we are out of time, but to Rayoni, Azmeena, Renae and Julia, thank you for your time and your wisdom. We absolutely appreciate it. And the things that I've taken away thousands of things, but that's probably an exaggeration, hundreds of things, but tens of things. We are the system. Everyone on this call is the system, and we have a role to play in fixing the system so that every human has an opportunity to reach their full potential at every layer of leadership. Hope is not a strategy. So we do have to be intentional about inclusion, and we do have to ask in our sporting environments, what do people need to succeed? Julia, I'm pinching that and I'm going to keep using it. Thank you. We do have to challenge merit. We do have to challenge bias, but remember, together we are stronger. So please use this community, use the resources that Vic Sport, that Sport and Recreation Victoria and the Change Our Game programs have. They are enormously useful, and I think what I'd love to see is all of your success stories plastered all over social media. Thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great day.
Thanks.